Sunday, December 7th, 1941. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Sailors were still asleep in their bunks. Church bells were about to ring across the island of Oahu. In the distance, the sky was clear, blue, and completely silent. At 7:48 a.m., that silence broke forever. The road to war. Inside the Japanese government, two factions argued over what to do next. Diplomats pushed for continued negotiations with Washington, hoping to find a compromise that would restore oil access without full-scale war. Military hardliners argued for a different path entirely. Expand south, seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, and if America intervened, strike first and strike hard. Strike. One man stood at the center of the coming storm. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet. Yamamoto had lived and studied in the United States. He understood its industrial capacity better than almost anyone in the Japanese military. Privately, he believed war with America was a war Japan could not win in the long run. But if war was coming regardless, Yamamoto believed there was only one strategy that gave Japan a chance: a swift, overwhelming first strike that would cripple America's Pacific Fleet before it could respond. Not to win the war outright, but to buy Japan 6 months to a year to seize what it needed before America could rebuild. His target? The US Pacific Fleet, anchored at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Throughout 1941, Japanese pilots trained intensively for a mission most of them didn't fully understand: shallow water torpedo attacks, precision dive bombing, coordinated strikes on a harbor that, on paper, seemed nearly impossible to hit effectively. Meanwhile, diplomatic talks in Washington continued, even as the attack plan was already being finalized in Tokyo. In less than 2 hours, over 2,400 Americans would be dead. The most powerful fleet in the Pacific would be crippled. And a nation that had spent years trying to stay out of a global war would be pulled into it by force. The fleet sails. On November 26, 1941, a Japanese strike force slipped out of Hitakapu Bay in the Kuril Islands and disappeared into the North Pacific. 2,403 Americans were dead, 1,178 wounded, 21 ships damaged or sunk, nearly 350 aircraft destroyed or damaged, most without ever leaving the ground. Amid the chaos, stories of resistance and heroism emerged. Sailors manned anti-aircraft guns without orders. Pilots at Haliwa Field managed to get a handful of fighters airborne, shooting down several attacking planes despite being vastly outnumbered. Doctors and nurses at the base hospital worked for hours without rest, treating burns and wounds far beyond anything they had trained for. By 9:45 a.m., less than 2 hours after it began, the attack was over. The USS Arizona was struck by an armor-piercing bomb that penetrated straight into its forward ammunition magazine. The resulting explosion killed 1,177 men in under 9 minutes. Nearly half of all American casualties that day. The ship sank in place, and it remains there still. The USS Oklahoma, hit by multiple torpedoes, capsized within minutes, trapping hundreds of sailors below deck. Some would be rescued through hull cuts over the following days. Most would not. At 7:48 a.m., the first bombs fell on Wheeler Field, targeting American aircraft on the ground. Minutes later, the main assault hit Battleship Row, and Hickam Field simultaneously. They were wrong. At 7:02 a.m., a radar station at Opana Point detected an enormous formation approaching from the north, the largest the operators had ever seen. They reported it up the chain of command. The junior officer who received the call assumed it was a scheduled group of American B-17 bombers arriving from California. He told them not to worry about it. At 6 a.m. Hawaii time, December 7th, the first wave of Japanese aircraft lifted off their carriers roughly 230 miles north of Oahu. 183 planes in total: torpedo bombers, dive bombers, high-altitude bombers, and fighter escorts. The morning of. This is the story of the morning America changed forever. By the first week of December, the US Pacific Fleet sat almost exactly as Yamamoto had hoped. Battleships neatly moored along Battleship Row, aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip on nearby airfields to guard against sabotage, radar systems only partially operational, and no torpedo nets protecting the harbor's shallow waters. Pearl Harbor was ready, just not for what was coming. On November 27th, US military commanders in Hawaii received a war warning from Washington, but it emphasized the likelihood of Japanese aggression in Southeast Asia, not Hawaii itself. Few believe Pearl Harbor was a realistic target. It was considered too far, too shallow, too well defended. That assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, over 400 aircraft, all moving in complete radio silence, deliberately avoiding shipping lanes to avoid detection. For nearly 2 weeks, the fleet vanished. American intelligence had cracked significant portions of Japan's diplomatic codes through a program called MAGIC. But the location of the strike force itself remained unknown. This single decision changed everything. Japan imported nearly 80% of its oil from the United States. Without it, its navy had less than 2 years of fuel reserves. Without it, the entire war machine Japan had built across Asia would grind to a halt. For Japan's leadership, this wasn't just an economic setback. It was an existential threat. In July 1941, after Japan moved troops into French Indochina, President Roosevelt made a decisive move. He froze Japanese assets in the United States and, alongside Britain and the Dutch government in exile, cut off oil exports to Japan entirely. Every December 7th, survivors and their families gather at the memorial built above her hull. Fewer of them return each year, but the story they carry of a quiet Sunday morning that changed the course of history remains one of the most defining moments in American memory. A reminder of how quickly the world can change and how a single morning can echo for generations. Today, the USS Arizona still rests at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Oil continues to leak from her wreckage. A slow, decades-long reminder some call the tears of the Arizona. Japan was resource poor. It had almost no domestic oil, rubber, or iron. To fuel its military ambitions, it needed to expand into China, into Indochina, and eventually into the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia controlled by European colonial powers. The United States watched this expansion with growing alarm. Japan's brutal occupation of China, including atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre, had already shocked the American public and its leadership. To understand December 7th, you have to understand the years that led to it. By 1941, the world had already been at war for over 2 years. Nazi Germany controlled most of Western Europe. Britain stood alone, holding on through nightly bombing raids. And on the other side of the globe, Japan had been fighting its own war since 1937, a brutal campaign to conquer and control China.